The Hallbrook Grand Hotel stood like a monument of glass and gold against the ink-black sky. Tonight, it wasn't just a building, it was a stage. A red carpet, thick and velvet soft, stretched from the curb to the grand entrance, where photographers waited like hungry wolves for a glimpse of the city's elite. I sat in the back of the limousine, watching the diamond ring on my finger catch the passing streetlights. "Mother, you're doing that thing again," Daniel said, his voice smooth as silk. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke navy suit, the one I had paid for. "You're overthinking. Tonight is a celebration of everything you've built." Vanessa, his wife, leaned over and patted my hand. Her smile was practiced, every tooth perfectly white, every hair in her blonde updo perfectly in place. "He's right, Eleanor. The Philanthropist of the Decade award. It's the crowning jewel of the Vance legacy. You deserve this." I smiled back, though the weight of the legacy felt heavier than usual. While I was looking at them with the pride of a mother who thought she had raised a dynasty, they were looking at me like a statue that had served its purpose and was ready to be mothballed. As we stepped onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs exploded. Daniel and Vanessa flanking me, their hands on my arms. Not to support me, I realized later, but to claim me. To the world. We were the gold standard of family loyalty. Inside the VIP lounge, the air smelled of expensive lilies and champagne. "I'll be right back," Daniel whispered, checking his watch. "I need to confirm the seating with the event coordinator." A few minutes later, I reached for my chest and gasped. My diamond brooch, the one my late husband, Thomas, had given me on our 20th anniversary, was gone. It must have loosened when I was getting out of the car. "Vanessa, I've lost my brooch." "I'm going to retrace my steps to the hallway," I said. "Oh, Mother, stay here." "I'll go," Vanessa offered, but she was already distracted by a group of socialites waving her over. "It's fine. I know exactly where I walked," I replied, slipping away from the crowd. I walked down the quiet, carpeted corridor leading toward the executive offices. The noise of the gala faded into a dull hum. As I passed a half-open door, I heard a familiar laugh. It was sharp, cold, and stripped of the warmth I had heard in the car. "Is the paperwork ready?" Daniel's voice rang out. "Everything is set," a stranger replied. "But Daniel, if she signs this award ledger, she's effectively handing over the liquidation rights of the entire foundation to you and your wife. Are you sure she won't read the fine print?" "My mother is a romantic, not a lawyer," Daniel sneered. "While she's up there basking in her 15 minutes of glory and crying over a trophy, she'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She thinks she's securing the future of the poor. In reality, she's paying off our debts at the Hallbrook Group." Vanessa's voice joined in, dripping with venom. "Once the foundation is liquidated, we won't have to play happy family anymore. We can finally move to Singapore and leave this grandma act behind." I froze. The brooch was in my hand. I had found it on the floor just outside the door, but the diamonds felt like shards of ice piercing my palm. The speakers in the hallway crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The presentation for the Philanthropist of the Decade is about to begin." I looked at the door, then at the bright lights of the ballroom at the end of the hall. My son thought I was a romantic who couldn't see the truth. He was half right. I was a mother who loved him. But as I pinned the brooch back onto my dress, my hands didn't shake. The grandma act was over. Now it was time for them to meet the woman who had actually built the empire they were so eager to sell. The hallway felt like a vacuum, sucking the air right out of my lungs. I stood paralyzed in the shadows, the cold marble wall the only thing keeping me upright. Inside that room, my son, my own flesh and blood, was pricing my life's work like a piece of scrap metal. While I was mourning the son I thought I raised, he was already celebrating the inheritance he hadn't earned. I forced my hands to stop shaking. "I am Eleanor Vance. I did not build an empire by crumbling at the first sign of a storm." Suddenly, the click-clack of stilettos echoed against the floor. Vanessa appeared around the corner, her silk gown shimmering like snake scales under the dim lights. Her eyes widened for a split second when she saw me, but her mask of devotion was back on before I could blink. "Mother, there you are," she gushed, rushing over to grab my arm. Her touch felt like ice. "We've been looking everywhere for you. The MC is about to announce your name." Why are you standing here in the dark? I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the hunger in her eyes, the way she adjusted my lace collar not out of care, but to make sure the product looked perfect for the cameras. I thought I dropped my brooch, I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. Forget the brooch, mother. We can buy you 10 more tomorrow, she laughed, a sound as hollow as her heart. She pulled a leather-bound folder from her clutch. But before we go on, the board needs your signature on this award acceptance ledger. It's just a formality for the foundation's records. You know how the auditors are. I looked down at the document. Award acceptance ledger was printed in gold at the top, but my eyes caught the fine print at the bottom. Section 4.2, Irrevocable Transfer of Executive Authority. She wasn't just asking for a signature. She was asking me to sign my own death warrant. Can't it wait until after the speech, dear? I asked, testing the depth of her desperation. Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but her grip on my arm tightened just a fraction too much. The press is waiting, Mother. They want to announce the new era of the Vance Foundation tonight. It would be so much more impactful if everything was finalized now. From the stage wings, I saw Daniel. He was standing by the curtain, watching us. He gave me a small, encouraging nod. The same nod he used to give me when he was a boy at his piano recalcitrance. Only now he wasn't playing Mozart, he was playing me. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. And now the woman who needs no introduction. The soul of our city, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The roar of the crowd was deafening. The spotlight swung toward the side of the stage, cutting through the darkness like a searchlight. Come on, Mother, Daniel whispered, appearing at my other side. He tucked the expensive fountain pen into my hand. It was heavy, gold-plated, and felt like a weapon. Sign it, and let's go claim your glory. I stood at the edge of the light. To the thousands of people in the ballroom, we looked like the perfect family, the matriarch flanked by her loyal successors. While the world prepared to give me a standing ovation, my children were waiting for me to sign away the ground I stood on. I looked at the pen. I looked at the document. Then, I looked at Daniel. You're right, I whispered, a cold fire igniting in my chest. It is time for a new era. I didn't sign the ledger. Instead, I tucked the pen into my sleeve and walked out into the blinding white light of the stage. As the applause washed over me, I approached the microphone. I could see Daniel and Vanessa in the wings, their faces pale with confusion. I leaned into the mic and smiled at the cameras. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice echoing through the grand hall. Tonight was supposed to be about the past, but I've decided that tonight is about the truth. The roar of the applause was like a physical wave, hitting me as I stepped out from the velvet curtains. 1,000 faces blurred into a sea of shimmering silk and black ties. The spotlights were so blindingly white that for a moment, the world disappeared. While the audience saw a woman at the pinnacle of her life, I felt like I was walking through a graveyard of my own kindness. I reached the mahogany podium. It felt solid, cold, and grounding. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. Daniel and Vanessa were standing in the shadows of the stage wings. They weren't looking at me with love. They were looking at the leather-bound folder resting on the edge of the podium, the award ledger. Like two vultures circling a dying animal, Daniel caught my eye and gave a small, impatient gesture. Sign it. Get it over with. I looked down at the crowd. I saw the city's most powerful people, judges, CEOs, old friends of my late Thomas. They were all waiting for the Grandma Eleanor speech, the one about hope, legacy, and the future of our children. Thank you. I began, my voice amplified and steady. It echoed through the hall, commanding silence. Tonight is a night of transitions. My son Daniel often tells me that the world is changing, that the old ways of doing things are outdated. I saw Daniel smirk. He thought I was finally yielding. He leaned toward Vanessa and whispered something. They looked triumphant. I have spent 20 years building the Vance Foundation, I continued. I built it on a promise I made to my husband, that our wealth would never be used for greed, but for the protection of those who have nothing. The room was pin-drop quiet. But Daniel is right about one thing, I said, my grip tightening on the edges of the podium. It is time for a new era. And as part of that transition, I have been asked to sign a document tonight. A document that will change the face of this foundation forever." Vanessa stepped forward slightly, her face glowing with anticipation. She looked like she wanted to run onto the stage and hand me the pen herself. Daniel signaled to the event assistant, who walked toward me with the gold-plated fountain pen. The ledger was open to the signature page. To the audience, it looked like a beautiful ceremonial moment. To me, it was the moment they expected me to commit financial suicide. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy. I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go, while my son stood there, counting the millions he thought he had already stolen. I realized he had forgotten one simple rule Thomas always taught him. I didn't sign the ledger. Instead, I looked directly into the main television camera, the one broadcasting this gala live to the entire city, and I smiled. It wasn't my grandma's smile. It was the smile of the woman who had built an empire from a single desk in a garage 30 years ago. Before I finalized the new direction of this foundation, I said into the microphone, "I would like to invite my personal auditor and the chief of police, who are sitting in the front row, to join me on stage for a special announcement regarding the debts Daniel Vance mentioned earlier this evening." The color drained from Daniel's face so fast he looked like a ghost. Vanessa's diamond mask shattered, her jaw dropping as she looked toward the front row, where two men in dark suits were already standing up. I turned my head slightly toward the wings, looking Daniel straight in the eye. "You wanted a new era, Daniel?" I whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to catch it. "Well, here it is." The room fell into a deathly silence. It wasn't the silence of respect, but the suffocating quiet that comes before a lightning strike. 1,000 eyes were fixed on Daniel and Vanessa, who stood frozen at the edge of the stage, their faces turning a ghostly gray under the harsh spotlights. While they thought I was standing on the precipice of senility, I was actually standing on the peak of a carefully constructed trap. I picked up the black leather folder from the podium, but I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I held the folder high, turning it toward the rows of cameras and reporters. "Ladies and gentlemen," my voice rang out, steady and cold. "My son Daniel spoke of a new era. And he was right. But that era does not belong to those who use charity funds to gamble away the future on personal debts." Daniel lunged toward me, his voice trembling as he tried to maintain a facade of authority. "Mother, you're tired. Give me the folder, I'll take care of the rest." "Stay back, Daniel," I snapped. The two police officers and the chief auditor stepped onto the stage from the front row. A murmur began to ripple through the ballroom like a wildfire. I opened the folder. Inside was not an award acceptance ledger. It was a stack of ironclad evidence proving that Daniel had embezzled over $50 million from the foundation to cover the massive losses of the Holbrook Group, the very company he claimed was thriving. Every penny in here, I pointed to the documents, was supposed to build schools and hospitals. Instead, it went into the pockets of the people standing right next to me. Vanessa let out a sharp hiss, her elegant mask dissolving into pure venom. "You old fool. You're going to destroy all of us. If we fall, you have nothing left." I looked at her with a faint, chilling smile. "Vanessa, I built this empire from nothing with my own hands. I am not afraid to tear it down to build something cleaner. As my husband once said, good companies aren't destroyed by competition. They're destroyed by the wrong people running them." The sharp click of handcuffs echoed through the silent ballroom. Daniel was restrained. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. Vanessa shrieked as she was led away by the officers, the diamonds on her gown falling to the stage floor like fake tears. I stood alone on the stage, bathed in the brightest, coldest spotlight. I didn't watch my children's backs as they were led away in shame. I looked directly into the camera lens, where the whole city was watching live. "Tonight, the Vance Foundation is not closing," I announced to the world. "It is finally being purified." I turned and walked away, leaving the hollow glamour of the Holbrook Hotel behind me for the very last time. The heavy oak doors of the Vance estate swung shut with a hollow thud that echoed through the marble foyer. The silence was absolute. It was a jarring contrast to the sirens, the camera shutters, and the panicked screams of my children that had filled the air only an hour ago. I walked slowly across the hall, my heels clicking rhythmically, the only sound in a house that suddenly felt far too large. While the city's news stations were busy dissecting the Vance scandal of the century, I was simply a woman returning to an empty home. I entered the study. The smell of old leather and Thomas's favorite tobacco still lingered in the air, a ghost of a life we had built together. I walked over to the fireplace and looked up at his portrait. His eyes seemed to follow me, filled with the same quiet strength he had shown until his final day. "I did it, Thomas," I whispered to the empty room. "I saved it. But I lost them." I sat down in the large leather chair behind the desk, the seat of power. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a small, worn-out wooden box. Inside weren't stocks or bonds but old photographs. Daniel's first steps, his graduation, his wedding day. I traced the edge of a photo where he was smiling, a young man who hadn't yet been consumed by the greed of the world he was born into. A single tear escaped, landing on the glass, blurring his face. While the world saw a cold, calculating matriarch who had just destroyed her own blood. The woman behind these closed doors was grieving a son who had died long before the police arrived. A soft chime came from my phone. It was a message from my lawyer. "The assets are frozen. The foundation is safe. Daniel and Vanessa's legal team is asking for bail. Your instructions." I looked at the phone for a long time. I thought about the award ledger. They tried to trick me into signing. I thought about the laughter I had overheard in that dark hallway, mocking my love as a weakness to be exploited. I typed back 4 words. "Let the law decide." I put the phone down and closed the wooden box. I walked to the window and looked out at the vast, dark gardens. Tomorrow, the lawyers would arrive. Tomorrow, the rebranding would begin. Tomorrow, I would be the shadow CEO the world feared. But tonight, I was just Eleanor. I reached out and turned off the desk lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The gala was over. The lights were out. And for the first time in 20 years, I finally knew exactly who was standing by my side. No one. And as the grandfather clock chimed midnight, I realized that was exactly how it had to be to keep the legacy alive.